Welcome to Season 4 of She Ventures. I am your host, Doria Lavanino. She Ventures is a podcast about women who are pivoting in their lives and careers. We live in a world where women of color founders raise 0.5% of all venture capital in 2020, and women overall a paltry 2.2%. This podcast is about elevating women's voices. Our new website, sheventurespodcast.com, provides resources, actionable tips, mentorship, and community. We do not subscribe to the idea that there is a dearth of fundable ideas from women. There is no pipeline problem. There may be a visibility problem, and that is what we are here to fix together. Let's talk about the reality of women, money, entrepreneurship, and work-life balance on this season of She Ventures. This woman pivoted from the Peace Corps in 2005 to entrepreneurship as the founder and CEO of Shea Yeleen, a social impact skincare business. She's dedicated to women's economic empowerment. She's trained thousands of women in Ghana, Burkina Faso, and Mali on quality shea butter production and business skills. She can also speak to growing from a bootstrapped business to earning distribution deals with Whole Foods and MGM resorts. She is here to talk to us today about how smart, socially responsible businesses can scale. Rahama Wright, welcome to She Ventures.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are an advocate for women's empowerment. I got that strong sense from everything that you have done in your life. Can you talk to listeners about how your upbringing shaped your views?
I feel like being a first-gen American and having an immigrant mother from West Africa, from Ghana, and just being able to live in a family where, on one hand, my dad had a master's degree, and on the other hand, my mom had a sixth grade education, and just even seeing within our family unit that there was inequality based on just how and where my parents grew up was something that really molded me from a very young age. I grew up in upstate New York, outside of Syracuse, in a very small town, but I had a family that gave me a global perspective. And I knew that that not everyone had access to the same things and not everyone had access to opportunity. And so I knew I wanted to do something in Africa from a very young age. I remember receiving the Peace Corps brochure in high school, and it was something that I was going to do when I graduated college. It wasn't until I started my Peace Corps service that I lived in a rural community in Africa for the very first time, and this was in Mali. A lot of the experiences I saw women having directly connected to the stories my mom would share growing up. Everything around some of the issues in terms of gender inequality. For example, her family wanted her to marry young versus going to school, and just some of the challenges that they had simply because they didn't have access to financial resources and struggled with systemic poverty within their communities, all of which were similar experiences my mom had growing up in Ghana. For me, it wasn't a choice. It was something that I feel was in my DNA in terms of caring about these issues surrounding women and being in these communities and seeing it firsthand, because I grew up in a very different way, really moved me and compelled me to want to do something about it.
It's one thing so true to read about it or contribute to a charity that does work in those areas to being there firsthand. With the Peace Corps, I was curious, are you able to decide your area of interest, or are you assigned based on what they feel you should be doing?
It's changed since I did it. And I was a Peace Corps volunteer in 2004. And since then, you have a little bit more choice. For example, I couldn't choose my country, I could only choose a region, but now you can choose the exact country you want to go to. I was assigned to be a community health educator. And so that meant I would work at the health center in my village and support the nurse with whatever she needed.
Did you see a lot of period poverty?
I knew it was there, but I didn't necessarily see it firsthand, meaning that I knew that there was, if you went to the local boutique, you wouldn't see tampons and pads, but women used other things that probably are more sustainable. But I didn't necessarily see it firsthand in terms of it being like a very obvious problem that women were facing. It typically was something very private, and so it's not necessarily a topic of conversation generally.
Makes sense. And I don't even know
Yeah.
why I suddenly thought of it. I think it's because it's become such a prevalent, talked about issue as of late. What were the most common issues that women faced?
One of the things that I think is important when talking about communities where you can see inequality, where you can see poverty issues, is having a balanced perspective, meaning that I was amazed at how much support community members provided to each other and how bonded women were in my community. There was always joy and happiness, but at the same time, for example, like you wake up and you have like daily chores you have to do. You have to get firewood. You have to start cooking for the day, washing clothes, taking care of kids. So there's a lot of work that has to be done. Many of the both men and women in my community were subsistence farmers. It was really grueling, hard labor work, and you really weren't getting a lot of money from it. And so there were issues of people getting sick with malaria, for example, and not being able to afford any medicines. And so just not having basic needs met, issues around access to clean water, lack of issues around electricity and things of that nature. Those were things that I saw firsthand and noticed how it made daily life difficult and hard. You kind of like juxtapose it against just like community bonds and just people supporting each other.
Men and women?
Yeah, men and women. If your neighbor is hungry, you're going to give them food. There was never a moment in my experience where if I was like lost, like in the middle of the night somewhere, this never happened. I'm just giving an example that someone wouldn't help me. You know what I mean? And invite me in and like take care of me. The generosity, it honestly, when I think about it, sometimes it kind of just blows me away that there are these just such strong community bonds. But there are realities that people also face. There is gender discrimination. I did see domestic violence. I did see different treatment between a boy child and a girl child, right? I think we need to talk about both of it. We need to talk about the beautiful things and the strong bonds and the commitment to family and community, but then on the other hand, there are some systemic issues that are really related to poverty issues and choices, and when you don't have access to money and income, how that can create negative ripple effects within the family environment as well as the community.
I love such a balanced answer, and I've never heard one like that. I tend to hear the negative piece, which is very important. Domestic violence, obviously, very disturbing and important, and often happens when women don't have a way out. It's a complex issue, but I really appreciate the emphasis also on community because I didn't realize that. So I learned that from you today. And you pivoted from the Peace Corps to a business making shea butter, soaps, creams, and balms by
Yeah.
employing women in Ghana. How did that pivot happen?
Yeah, if you told me in undergrad that I'd be running a skincare business, I would look at you like you were crazy. I certainly never in my wildest dreams imagined that I would build a brand from scratch and impact the lives of women within my supply chain. I thought I was going to work for the State Department, and become a foreign service officer. That was the plan. I was going to finish Peace Corps, take the foreign service exam. I had already interned at the State Department. That's kind of the career trajectory I had plotted out. I'm sure you've probably guessed I'm slightly type A. So had a very detailed plan. Being in my community, being in the village and seeing firsthand and learning and being able to connect the dots between a natural resource that grows in abundance right in the backyards of so many women's villages, and knowing that that product is generating billions of dollars or part of billion-dollar industries, whether it's the confectionery industry or the personal care industry, and just realizing not only the unfairness, but the fact that these industries would not exist without the labor of African women. When I say industry, I talk about specifically shea butter. Made me want to do something. I can't explain why. I can't explain how I even imagined I could do anything, but I felt very strongly that women in Africa deserve to be at the table, and not only deserve to be at the table, but become leaders and beneficiaries of a natural resource that they created. That's what kind of created that pivot for me.
You were so young. You were in your early 20s. Like, where do you start? You have the idea, and then, I mean, that's a big idea. Where did you start?
Google. I moved back to the US. I moved to DC. I had interned at DC my senior year, and I loved the city. And so I knew I wanted to move back here. I just started Googling all my questions.
That's honest. And it's something
Yeah.
everyone can do, right?
Right.
It's heartening because it's like, no, you don't need to get an MBA. You can go to Google University, find
Yeah.
a good source, and figure it out.
I considered getting an MBA, but I couldn't get into any of the programs I wanted to. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to try this out. And I would Google everything. I spent a lot of time using and finding as many free resources as I could. For example, the SBA SCORE program that connects you with a business advisor. I attended a lot of conferences or meetups, and I would just talk to people, whether it was at a bus stop, at the grocery store. Like, I would just tell people, hey, I just came back from the Peace Corps. I learned about this product. I want to create it into a business, a social impact business. I think my ability to just share my vision to anyone who would give me the time of day started building my network. And people would shoot me an email and say, hey, Rama, I remember that you wanted to do this. Have you learned about this program or this resource? Or have you talked to this person?
So networking was key.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, because I had no money. None. I didn't have a friends and family route or a seed route. I had $6,000 to my name. I used part of it to get an apartment, and the other part I used to start Shea Yeleen. People were the guide. The people helped me. They pointed me in the direction that I needed to go to. They introduced me to other people they thought could be helpful. Honestly, Google and networking were the only things I had access to when I first started Shea Yeleen. I didn't have access to anything else.
So the hustle is created, right? I mean, you wanted it and you had a vision, and it's not easy to do, but you were able to do it. You also have trained thousands of women to either produce shea butter or learn business skills in Africa. Based on what you were saying before, both in the positive and negative, how did those challenges impact your ability to train women?
So the trainings happen in a couple of different ways, either through Shea Yeleen's on the ground team or through partnerships and other organizations that have invited me to come and do trainings or support business associations, women's groups, etc. Some of it has been done through even the State Department. They run programs where they bring American experts to various countries and they'll have you do sessions, workshops, trainings, etc. So those are the kind of the three main ways that I've done these trainings, and it has been in several countries, and yes, thousands of primarily women, but also guys too.
Okay, good.
And for me, my experience has, for the most part, has always been positive. Whether it's here in the US or, in Senegal or Ghana or Mali, one of the things I've observed is that for the most part, people always want to be better. People want to do better. They want to learn. They don't want to stay in the same place they've always been. And I think that's a common human attribute. It's absolutely incredible that I had this vision to start this company, but I also had access to a lot more resources. Even though they were limited, I certainly see my entrepreneurial journey as one of privilege. It blows my mind how other people who have even less can also still dream and believe. It may have been audacious for me, but imagine not even having just your basic needs, yet you still believe and dream for more. Do you know what I mean?
I completely do. And I just one of the things I love and I want to highlight is the women that work for you earn $10 a day. And I looked at a recent report. And I don't know if this was men and women. It didn't specify. It said that the average earnings is $2.98 a day. So that means that you're paying your workers a living wage. In addition, and I was really curious about this, you have the Shea Butter Cooperative members are provided with health insurance and access to savings groups. Was that something that you implemented? Did they implement it? How did that come about?
Well, let me say this. They don't work for me, meaning that the cooperatives are separate entities from Shea Yeleen, which is a US based social business. The women are organized in cooperatives that are in line with the regulatory environment of their country. And they are required to meet certain standards and reporting and all of that. And we help and support that. I see the relationships between the women owned cooperatives that we work with and Shea Yeleen as a partnership. We essentially bring our strengths together to create a more ethical and fair supply chain, centering and supporting women's work. A lot of the programs and the work that we do comes directly from the community, whether we are enhancing something that they've already done, adding an improvement. So, for example, providing the ability for women to access production equipment, which reduces labor intensity and makes production more efficient. So, that's an added improvement, that's a benefit. But they were already producing, they were already doing this work. We come in as partners, as supporters, and help enhance and get them to the next level and provide an entire ecosystem that supports them.
It makes so much sense. And it's a win-win.
Exactly. And it also takes away this idea of a foreign entity coming in and making changes. And instead, it creates more equity and even in the power dynamic. Because the reality is it's really easy for a foreign entity that has so much resources, that has, in comparison, I should say, to the local community, to be the driver, to be kind of like in charge and be the boss and kind of replace local leadership, local intellectual property, all of that, right? But what I want to build is not that power dynamic, and instead create a partnership where the women in our community feel just as important, if not more, than this foreign entity that's coming in to support and help. And part of the way that we do this is by giving our cooperative members opportunities to do reverse trade missions to the US. This was, of course, before COVID-19, but we would have co-op members come to the US and actually walk into a Whole Foods store and talk to the Whole Foods buyer, share their story, see the product on the shelf. I cannot tell you how much that completely changes the power and dynamic, because now you're not just talking about equality and fairness in terms of financial compensation, but now you're transforming someone's life based on experience, based on widening their perspective, based on bringing them all the way through the journey so they have full transparency and understanding. And then when they go back, that's shared amongst their community members. Because I have to be careful in that I do have foreign privilege. As an American, when I travel, most of the time I have more money than the people in the local communities. Most of the time I'm accessing and having the ability to do a lot of things that people within their local communities don't have the ability to do. So I have to be careful about that and recognize that I can be put on a pedestal, and I don't want that. Instead, I want the community members that I work with to see me as their equal, and vice versa. Doing that actually creates a level of confidence building for the women who are able to do those trips, that also gives them the ability to feel, wow, what I do matters. I actually now have an understanding. I deserve this opportunity. It's not a handout. You know what I mean? And that's the type.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're seeing the full thing,
Exactly.
Just as one can't understand what it's like being in a village in Africa without having been there, likewise, it's not possible to understand what their products are doing in the US and how they're helping people. How do you choose the women, and how many have come over?
Oh, I don't do that. That is a choice that's done within their community.
Gotcha. Okay.
And again, I try to be as hands off as possible, and instead kind of play the role of, here are options. What do you want to do? What do you think? And even when it comes to data collection, because you talked about that 5 times multiplier against the local minimum wage that we provide to cooperative members, that wasn't just a number that came out of thin air. It was a number that came from data collection, interviewing the women, asking them questions around cost of living, around compensation expectations. These are conversations that the women in our communities very rarely have with partners. Instead, people tell them, I'm going to pay this,
Exactly.
and
Either
you should be
accept it.
happy.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What were they? I'm curious about that, because I think it's very easy for, I think it's women all over the world actually have a hard time negotiating their worth. But in that case, especially with the power dynamic, is it that they're told you're going to work for X dollars a day and you either can accept it or I'll go to someone else?
Yes.
Is that okay?
That's exactly what happens. And here's the thing. Imagine if you've worked really hard. When we look at production, for example, you've worked really hard on creating a batch of shea butter. You're making it by hand. You walked out into the woods to collect the fruit, bring it in. That could have been a 5-mile walk. And you spend a day and a half making this product. And a buyer shows up and says, I'm going to pay 25 cents for this product. Even if you say, no, I'm not going to sell it for that much, they'll just go to the next community. And because there's so much need, 25 cents is better than nothing. And that, unfortunately, is the power dynamic that continues to exploit the labor of African women in these communities. There's also the lack of exposure and awareness that you can get better pricing because women aren't networked with each other. You're talking about women in isolated communities. There may not be easy roads or easy way of traveling. And so you're mostly in your community. That's why for us, that exposure and widening the perspective and being able to teach and train around profitability and pricing and putting in the time. So don't only calculate in the raw material expenses, but how much time did it take and what should be the hourly rate you pay yourself for that time. Those are all the conversations we have with women in our community.
And opportunity cost. All of it, right? Shea butter, I don't know a lot about. If one produces it, how long does it stay fresh or good for?
So the shelf life of pure natural raw shea butter, which is what the women make, is roughly 24 months. And this is based on keeping it in certain storage conditions, making sure that it's a cool environment, there's low moisture, all of that.
And it would be a sealed.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that really, when I thought about your business, I was thinking about, okay, producing shea butter, the cooperatives are doing that. Then you're involved, presumably, with shipping it to the US, or you have to understand the international laws. You have to know about trade. You have to know about scaling, all of it. And I thought, my God, like how I felt overwhelmed and kind of had anxiety just thinking about the supply chain. How was it hard to figure out at the beginning, or how, again, was it Google? Was it experience?
The great thing was I was not even thinking about any of that stuff. So it was quite easy.
It was a blessing.
I was like, I just need to take this product to help these women make it and bring it to the US.
Brilliant.
It wasn't until I started down the path of really trying to figure out how to do it that I was like, oh, this is a lot harder than I thought. But at that point I had already made a commitment, and my personality is I finish what I start. I just didn't realize it would be 15 plus years of doing this.
Right. That's what people, they see the overnight success, quote unquote, right, but they don't see the 15 years of hard work. Yeah.
Exactly.
And you're being very modest. You also were appointed by President Obama to sit on the Advisory Council doing business in Africa, and you've been reappointed twice. What goals has the council achieved?
So the council was the very first of its kind, and it was a way for the U.S. government to change how they interacted with the continent of Africa. Prior to this council, it was always very development aid driven, and so foreign assistance was the primary way of seeing African countries, instead of really identifying and figuring out how to work with African countries from a trade and commerce perspective. And during the Obama administration, there was this realization that the fastest growing economies were in Africa. These economies were growing faster than anywhere else. Yet the US only had this very old way of looking at the continent from an aid perspective. They established this advisory council through the Department of Commerce as a way to help the US government learn and identify how to approach the continent of Africa from a commercial perspective and identify ways to better improve and engage on trade issues.
Oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah. It was. And I truly, I did feel during my first appointment completely, what is it called when you're at the table and you're like, how did I get to this table? Imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
So I was reading an article saying women should stop using imposter syndrome, but that's how I felt. So I have to keep it real and way over my head, right? Because here I am, the youngest member, running the smallest business with heads of Fortune 500 companies.
Wow.
Yeah. And I did feel that initially, what can I contribute to this? These people have been doing business for decades. They work for incredibly large companies. And I'm here working at a micro level, really identifying how a very specific agricultural sector can benefit the lives of women in the most isolated communities. That was my focus. I soon discovered that my voice was important because it wasn't only speaking on behalf of my journey as an entrepreneur, but also these women who are often overlooked when policymakers are making decisions. It turned into a very empowering experience for me where I doubled down on my perspective and my position. And I think that's why I was reappointed additional times because I am offering an insight into an area that a lot of people haven't really thought holistically about. And the only reason why I think differently is because of the experience I've had in those communities.
Yes. And I was curious when you mentioned Fortune 500 companies, did they come to the table with kind of the attitude that you were speaking of previously of, I don't want to say of exploitation, but that's the word that comes to mind. Or were they really willing to listen and think about how to do business in an equitable way?
It really depended on the sector and the company. But one of the things that surprised me was there was always room for another perspective if you were willing to use your voice. Even though there certainly were differences in terms of some of the larger companies could do things like host events and sponsor things, right? Because they have the budget for doing things like that. So that kind of would give them a little bit of a platform. But I think that the way the council was managed really created fairness, and in that everyone had a voice and everyone could use their voice. And I also think, too, the administration wanted diversity in thought, and the contributions that everyone was making was weighted the same way. And it was one of those things where we would deliberate on certain policy recommendations, and it would be a democratic kind of conversation in terms of, is this something the entire group agrees on? So, of course, I always would contribute well, we can't forget the women
Yes.
and gender, And so
I'm so glad you're at the table.
yeah. And so I think, and one of the things I learned too, some things are certainly, when it comes to inequality, very intentional, very systemic. And some things are simply people are unaware. I think that part of bringing a more diverse group of people together is to be able to expose that lack of awareness. And when that is exposed, the real work becomes, well, then how do we correct it?
I agree so much. The inherent bias that we have without realizing it, right?
Yes.
I think I cut you off. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, no, no. This conversation has fired me up. So.
No, I'm getting fired up too. What do you think the biggest misconception is about social entrepreneurship?
I think the misconception is that you're a nonprofit and you can't really make money by doing good.
Right. They don't go hand in hand.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of times, because I work in these rural communities and work with a segment of the global population that oftentimes we don't hear much from, people frequently think it's a handout and don't really consider it a serious business model, especially when I first started. But over the years, there has been a shift. The shift has been, we can't continue to run the global economy by leaving so many segments of the global population out and not creating business models that give everyone access to their basic needs.
What do you attribute the shift to?
I think that there are a couple of things. Technology, one, the world has become a lot smaller with it. People can learn about shea producers in Ghana by going online. You can see stuff on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. And the fact that it's not having to board a plane and fly across the Atlantic and see things, I think that certainly has changed the way we view things. And then also, too, people from a lot of these countries also sharing their voices and their perspective. And I think the younger generation has just grown up in a world where we're all much more closely tied and looped in together. So you can't say things anymore like, oh, well, do people have buildings in Africa, or is everyone living in the jungle and swinging from vines? You can't say that anymore because you can actually see, metropolitan areas of the continent that can compete with anywhere else. So I think, yes, for sure, technology. Also, people are traveling a lot more and traveling a lot younger. The other part of it is people, it's not necessarily they care more, but I do think that when we can see what is happening, right, we now have a choice. And we have more information about not only supply chains like shea butter, but chocolate, coffee. I think really the fair trade coffee movement, which was actually became really popular because of the Lutheran Church and churches that would bring in coffee producers who would talk about how coffee was made, and then they would partner because they would have like their Sunday coffee hours, for example. Certain movements like those, that started decades ago, but now we're all reaping kind of the benefits because suppliers and, farmers and cooperatives, all of that language is not new. It's has become more mainstream because of all the work that was done decades ago. I think all of those reasons are why there has been this shift, and people care about knowing the ingredients that are in their food and knowing about the ingredients in their body and skincare. And if you think about it, a lot of those ingredients are coming from these very small communities around the world. We don't grow coffee in America unless there's something that I don't know. Do we?
I don't know. I was like, I'm not going to say anything because I actually am not sure.
Right? I've never heard of an American coffee brand.
No.
We're sourcing all of these things. I know we don't grow chocolate here.
Okay, I'll take your word on it. Like, I honestly don't know, and I feel terrible. I should know more about it.
We're already in these global supply chains. Most of our foods are coming from foreign places. If that is the case, we need to learn about how it comes from a farmer in this X country and then lands on a shelf. And that has become much more normalized conversation. And because of the interest, curiosity, the shrinking of the world, it makes my job a lot easier.
Such a thoughtful answer. I'm so curious about this. Okay, so amazing you've scored these distribution deals with Whole Foods and MGM Resorts. I wanted to ask, how did those come about? And did it require you to suddenly scale like crazy to meet the demand? Talk to us about that a little bit.
With Whole Foods, I have to say that I pitched my local Whole Foods several times. And it got rejected several times. And so if at first you don't succeed, keep trying. That's the advice. How I was able to get in Whole Foods was through a program in the North Atlantic region that was spearheaded by a regional vice president who was trying to create a pipeline of socially conscious businesses that could be brought into the Whole Foods pipeline. And I applied to the program, I got into it. And what it did was it connected me to a buyer who I could pitch to see if they'd be interested in bringing my products in. And so that was kind of the journey. But prior to that program, I would just walk in and say, "Hey, I have this product. Would you like to bring it in?" That's how Whole Foods used to be, where you could just go in and talk to a local buyer in your section, and they very well could make that decision in the store, because Whole Foods was very much committed to the whole idea of buying local and supporting the local supply chains. It's changed dramatically since then. That was my experience, but I just want to share that it's not the same. They've actually become a lot more corporate and standard in the way that they bring brands into their distribution.
Gotcha. And so for women who might want to do that, what was the name of the program that you?
So the program doesn't exist anymore, but it was called Youth Trade. And yeah, it doesn't exist. And it was only in one area. So it wasn't even like an entire global Whole Foods program. And that's one of the things that was really unique about Whole Foods, is that they could launch kind of these like innovative new ideas regionally or locally. But that has since kind of been like phased out now that they've become more corporate, versus before, where they had a very decentralized buying strategy or process. Now it's incredibly centralized. Centralized. There are a lot more systems in place as they try to become more standardized throughout all of their locations. But that was how I got in. But the good thing was, because it was the small program, I didn't have to like increase production. I did increase my production, of course, but it wasn't like going from like a couple hundred to like 10,000 units.
That's what I was wondering. I was like, did you have to raise capital, or what happened? Yeah.
Yes, but I did raise some capital to help me grow. Because we launched in 7 stores, and then we grew to 24, and then we grew to 120. My experience was, it was a slow kind of scaling. It wasn't like this immediate shipping truckloads of your Shea across country lines. It it really was great in that it allowed me to understand the retail process, because I, again, had no business starting a beauty business. Or even a product-based business. I mean, everything from sourcing, packaging, designing, production, all of that I just learned by doing. I didn't have experience. It was my best guess. I was like, oh, let me try this. This might work. The retail side was the same. I'd never gotten into a retail store. I didn't know how to talk to buyers or maintain a relationship with a buyer. Thankfully, having Whole Foods as the first retailer gave me the ability to practice without the tremendous pressure of having to scale very quickly. I would do things like go into one of their newer stores and actually volunteer my time to help them set it up. By doing that, I would learn so much. I would learn like why they would like place a certain product on one shelf versus another shelf because of sizing. If the taller products go up because they're taller, and
I've also been told that brands pay for placement on shelves. I don't know if that's true or not.
some do, but some retailers don't allow that. I don't know if Whole Foods has changed that. You can pay for end caps at the end of the aisle when you see like all those like beautiful displays, and those are ways for promotions and things of that nature. But then the like in aisle on shelf, that hasn't necessarily been the experience I witnessed. But again, things do change, and you're definitely right. Folks do pay for certain placements.
You were able to talk to your customer base too.
Yep, we did hundreds, if not thousands, of demos. I myself did hundreds of demos, and then, we had a demo team. So yeah, it was probably a lot of demos.
How would you recommend aspiring beauty entrepreneurs to approach distributors today?
With COVID-19, I think it would have been very hard for me to launch my business right now, because I focus so heavily, I would say retail business, so in store. Focus so heavily on the in-person sales. And so I was in the store at the demo table selling my products. Like, It was not just, oh, here are products on shelf, go check it out. It was like a grueling talking to so many people, giving out so many samples and testers. With the way COVID is now, it probably would be very hard to do that. I would actually advise beauty brand, uh, in their early kind of stages of launching to really look at digital and e-commerce and use that as the starting point to building out and understanding what their customer will like, what is the product that sells the most, kind of all that early data, and use that as a guide to identify the best retailer for them, because not all retailers are going to be a fit depending on what your positioning is, what your branding is, what your messaging, etc. Not every retailer is going to be the fit for you. And until you understand and have a very clear sense of who your customer is, it's going to be very difficult to align with the right retailer.
I was wondering, in terms of entrepreneurship, what would you say to date has been your proudest moment or accomplishment? And what's been the most difficult thing?
My proudest moment was when I had Gladys and Joanna from Northern Ghana come to the US for 3 weeks, and we did a road trip across 24 Whole Food stores in the North Atlantic region. We got into a little rental car and drove to New York, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. Honestly, I wish I had videotaped it, the entire experience. It would have been a top reality TV show. It was amazing. And
I
it was
bet.
just so great to experience that with them, when typically when we experience things, it's me in Ghana. And now it's them in New York, in Boston, in Portland. That experience, I just can't describe how impactful it was to share that with them, and how that even changed the way they viewed a lot of the requirements around quality. For example, we focus so much on quality. I know everyone says that their product is the best, but our product is the best. And it's because of the intentionality around everything that we do to ensure that women are working in safe environments. They have access to the tools. We do things like triple filtering, just the entire process. For them, they're like, well, why do we have to do this step? And it's like, well, quality, if you send a bad quality product, it's going to be returned. And then for them to be in a store and satisfaction guaranteed is like in huge letters.
Right, right.
And now they get it. They're like, oh, okay. They point and they're like, what's that? What does this mean? And it's like, that satisfaction guarantee. That means if a customer doesn't like it, they can bring it back. That's unheard of in Ghana. People don't bring stuff back.
Right. I didn't even think about that, but okay, makes sense.
Yeah, it's very different when someone tells you something. I mean, remember when our parents would just tell us stuff and we'd like kind of roll our
Blow
eyes
them
and be like,
off.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah. And then one day you were literally living exactly what your mom said would happen.
Yes. Yeah. I hate to admit, but yes, I have been there, and I'm living it now as a mother.
Exactly. And so it's the same thing. It's not just parental child relationship, but it's also the same when you're working with your partners and you're trying to get something off the ground. It's much easier to buy into something when you can see for yourself.
100%, and see the 360 of it.
Exactly. I'm so proud of that entire experience.
How long did it take you?
The trip itself was about 3 weeks, but the planning and leading up to all of it, getting them visas, getting all the documentations, that took several months. So that was probably at least 6 or 8 months of planning and pulling it all together, because we thought about it in the fall and then we actually did it in the spring.
Are you going to do another one?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to do another one in 2020, but then everything was canceled with COVID. It just COVID really impacted our business.
I was going to ask that. Yeah, because I was wondering a couple of things. I was curious about how your digital sales are compared to your in-store sales? Because the women that I've spoken with on the podcast since COVID have mostly seen an increase in digital. And I was wondering if you've seen the same.
Initially, all of our sales were flat because we didn't have inventory.
Right. The supply
And
chain
so,
issue. Yeah.
yeah. And so I'm like, oh, that's so great. Everyone did amazing on digital, like the first couple of months of COVID. And I was like, I am sold out of everything.
Yeah. How long did that last for, the supply chain issues? Are they still going on?
Still dealing with it. Yeah, still dealing with it. Well, for one, the huge one was that Ghana closed its borders for, it was almost 4 months or just a little over 4 months, and completely restricted folks coming in and out. I mean, they locked down very fast because their health infrastructure could not bear what was happening, for example, in Italy. Like, it's just not there. And so a lot of African leaders very quickly just locked everything down. And so that meant our processing centers closed down for a few months. They had a mandatory in-country shelter in place. People were restricted in terms of movement and all of that. I mean, it's since changed, but initially, those very first couple of months was very hard and difficult. Inventory was a huge issue. We've now started getting all of our inventory back, but components are still, getting access to our components is still a challenge because so much is imported from China. And, you've seen the news in terms of freight. It really hasn't gotten back to normality. I will say this, we definitely shifted to online, but not only online on our website, but for example, this year we launched with Macy's, and we've been doing really well.
Congrats.
Yeah, thank you. We've been doing really well on their platform. They've been an incredible retail partner. They're doing some really interesting things around supporting clean beauty brands as well as Black-owned brands. I've fit both. And so that has put me in a really nice spot with them. And I absolutely love working with my buyer. She's just phenomenal. She's one of the easiest buyers I've ever worked with, which is shocking because, you would think Macy's is so corporate that they'd make it difficult. But
it's so nice when you have an ally on the
yes,
inside,
yeah.
right? Huge. I wanted to ask you, because this is going to come out in February, Black History Month. It's another kind of two-sided question, which is, do you think Black women face unique challenges? I guess I'm asking in the US specifically, you being a Black business owner and a woman, or do you have unique opportunities, or both?
I would say it's both. I would say that in my experience, some of the things that I've faced, it's not obvious, meaning that it's not that someone is like trying to hold you back like physically, right? It's the little microaggressions or people thinking that I didn't start the business or having to jump the hurdle of like, is this person trustworthy? Is she actually doing what she says she's doing? Those type of microaggressions, which is, it's not like in your face discriminatory practices, but it's the mental hurdle of like getting people to actually see you and believe that you are doing what you are saying that you're doing and that you are intentionally working hard on growing your business. I think it is harder for Black women to jump that hurdle simply because we're not typically the ones that you see in positions of leadership in, founding businesses, et cetera, even though we've been doing it, even though the Black entrepreneurs have always been around, but we've always just kind of been in the background. We're not the ones that when you really think about a successful business person, a Black woman is not going to be the first person you think of. And I think, it's everything around kind of how our society has been built and created and who gets to be able to be visible and who doesn't. So there's that, right? The unconscious bias and all of that. It takes kind of a mental toll because I do feel that being a Black woman in business, I can never make a mistake. I always have to have my A game. especially in the beginning because I was so young and people even thought I was still in college. It's that round face, it just gets you every time. And so, I always had to feel like I was wearing the right outfit, my hair looked right, my presentations always had to be stellar. So I was constantly going above and beyond because I would do some entrepreneurial events or business events. And I always stood out because I always was just so prepared. But it kind of takes a mental toll on you where then you kind of have anxiety around perfection and not making a mistake. And if I lose this opportunity, is this going to ruin it for me? You kind of have that dialogue with yourself. And it's always around being not kind of like fighting against the stereotypes and the perceptions that you're not going to be good enough or you're not going to be able to deliver. Not because you can't, but because you're Black. And unfortunately, that is just the reality of the society that has been created. And having to jump those hurdles has been challenging in terms of the mental exhaustion that you're constantly going through. I do want to be, at least in my experience, that has been part of the challenge. And then, of course, the fact that it's much harder to gain access to capital. That's just women in general. But then, of course, when you start breaking it down, you'll see that Black women are all the way at the bottom.
Yeah. No, it's really unbelievable. And I know you know these stats that 2.3% of all women receive venture capital, which is nothing. And then Black women specifically, it's, I believe, 0.4% was the statistic I most recently saw, which is abysmal.
Yes.
It's not a supply chain issue. It's not a pipeline issue. I think to your point, right? It's like you don't fit the mold of who I think of as a company founder. And I think that's changing with more and more women being involved in venture capital. I hope.
Yes, it is. And the other part of my answer is it is changing and there's a shift happening. I feel like last year, all of a sudden, corporate America discovered Black-owned businesses.
So true. They're woke. Yeah.
It was like we woke up one day and it was like, there are Black businesses out here. Let's help them. Yeah. Everybody go. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying It was almost overnight. All these programs appeared. And what has happened, though, is this shift of acknowledgement and visibility. And I think that is going to have huge ripple and trickle down effects for not only businesses that are going to be launched, businesses that are trying to scale right now. Because one of the hardest things as a business owner, I think we all share this, is being able to get seen, is being able to be heard. And that amplification and the position that corporate America has taken in the past year to intentionally amplify and make visible Black-owned businesses, I think has tremendously changed the trajectory of my business and will do so for so many others. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that we've always been here. Black people, since the coming to the US, contributed to economic development, first with free labor, and then with all the renaissances that we had across this country, where Black communities were building and growing spectacular businesses to the point where white mobs would burn down their towns because of rage and jealousy. I mean, that's the reality, right? And so we've always been here. And to be able to live at a time where there's acknowledgement and we're being seen, we're being heard, I feel like very blessed to be able to live through this experience. One of the things that we're learning is that the issues and the systemic issues in our country around race and around gender and all of that, every single one of us has a responsibility to contribute to changing it. And I think for the very first time, because of the murder of George Floyd and so many others before, we're essentially having a reckoning. And it is both good and bad. But at the end of it, I believe America as a whole will be better for it, because this is the fight for real inclusion. It's a fight for recognizing that we are all Americans and we all deserve the fruits of being an American. Not only some of us, all of us, and that we all deserve to really truly live this American dream. It's going to take everything that's happening right now and even more. But I do feel very fortunate that when I first started Shea Yeleen to now, I see so much more around programs for Black female founders, programs for Black owned businesses, funding that's specifically set up for our companies. Everything from banking is looking at how race has affected the way they give out loans. You know what I mean? People are actually paying attention.
Yeah, the Federal Reserve is doing a whole series on racism, and I'm like, what? Wow,
Exactly.
I'm glad, but it's taken a long time.
It certainly has. And I think the beauty of all of this is that we all can change and we have the choice if we choose to. And I also think it feels different. It doesn't have a handout feel. It actually has this is the right thing to do. And I think there's a difference.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it goes back to what you were saying early on about the women that you're working with in the cooperatives. It's like having that equal power feeling. Absolutely. Getting towards the end of our show, I could go on for you're so fascinating to speak with, and I've learned so much.
Thank you.
What is your favorite product of what you offer?
Oh, it's the balm. It will always be the balm because it's the balm. And so the balm is just shea butter in its purest form. We take that balm and we make a cream out of it. But my favorite product is our balm, the lavender honeysuckle. And it's actually one of our top selling products as well.
I'm looking. That's the one that I tried. It is really, if you have dry skin in particular, it is so incredibly smoothing, and it has fragrance, but it's not overpowering. We
intentionally keep it light. Yep. Keep it very light. And it just kind of like melts right into your skin. It keeps you hydrated, moisturized. It's my favorite product, even though I shouldn't have favorites. I should love them all
but
equally.
We all do. About your growth since you started to where you are today, can you give listeners some idea of where you're at?
Oh, well, I would say one very clear indicator of our growth is we're building a manufacturing facility in Washington, D.C.
Congrats.
And so we going from just having like a handful of products to now being able to set up an entire facility that we're actually going to build on behalf of not only Shea Yeleen, but also use it as a teaching lab for other early stage beauty businesses and give them access to everything I didn't have access to when I first started, so that the next generation, they don't have to Google everything like I did. They'll actually
have someone help them.
Yeah, have a space to be able to do that. Our DC government is a partner of ours for it. They've given us grant funding. I raised just under $2 million to launch this space.
So cool.
Yeah. And so I'm really, really excited about it. And it's something that we will be launching next fall. That kind of shows from going from a Peace Corps volunteer in a small rural village working at a community health center to now building out a manufacturing facility in our nation's capital.
Yes, Queen. That's right. Yes, you did. You did it.
Oh my gosh, this conversation has been fire.
I love what you're doing. And I didn't know about Macy's. Are there other places where listeners can find your product, if you could let them know?
Our business with MGM paused because they closed for several months, but we will be relaunching with them early next year as well. We're also trying to build our business on Amazon. those are some of the areas that folks can find us in addition to our website.
What is your website URL?
It's sheayeleen.com, which is spelled SHEAYELEEN.com. And our social platforms are all Shea Yeleen.
Follow them. It's great product. It's been great hearing about your journey. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to She Ventures. Like what you heard? You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and sign up for our newsletter so you never miss a show.